The cop was standing on my driveway, boots planted on cracked asphalt my family poured back when gas was cheap and people still waved at each other, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Sir, you're being detained for trespassing on HOA property." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I even let out this short breath through my nose, like a laugh that didn't fully commit, because the idea was so absurd it didn't register as real. Trespassing on my own land. Then I saw her, standing a few feet behind him, arms folded tight across her chest, lips pressed into that thin, satisfied line she always wore when she thought she was winning. Was Celeste Hardwick, president of the Ridgewood Glen Homeowners Association, self-appointed guardian of property values, and full-time professional busybody. She caught my eye and gave me this tiny nod, like we were in on the same joke, and I was the punchline. I said, "Officer, I think there's been a mistake. This is my driveway. I own this property." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, eyes flicking back to Celeste. "Well, sir, she's telling me you've repeatedly refused to comply with HOA regulations, and this area is listed as common association property." Celeste didn't miss a beat. Everyone in Ridgewood Glen follows the rules. No exceptions. That's how we protect the community. Something in her voice made my stomach drop. Not fear exactly, more like the cold realization that this woman truly believed that saying something confidently enough made it true. The summer heat was rolling off the pavement in visible waves, cicadas screaming from the trees, my shirt sticking to my back. And that's when I reached into my back pocket and felt the folded paper I'd been carrying around for weeks. The one I hadn't planned on using like this. Before I pulled it out, though, let me rewind a little, because none of this makes sense without understanding how we got here. My name's Ethan Caldwell. I was 51 at the time this all went down. Spent almost 3 decades as a residential electrician until my knees and lower back decided they'd had enough of crawl spaces and ladders. I wasn't rich, wasn't poor, just steady. Drove an old Ford that smelled like coffee and wire insulation. Friday nights meant burgers on the grill and a cold beer on the porch. The land, though, that was different. My grandfather bought this place back in the late 70s, when this whole area was nothing but soybean fields and stubborn red clay. He was the kind of man who fixed things himself and trusted paperwork more than people. When developers came knocking in the early 2000s, flashing big numbers and bigger promises, he listened politely and then did what he always did. He thought 3 steps ahead. He sold them most of the acreage, enough for rows of identical houses and winding streets with names like Whispering Oak and Morning Dew. But he kept the farmhouse, my place, and a handful of small parcels scattered throughout the development. Odd little pieces most folks wouldn't think twice about. I remember him telling me once, sitting on the porch while the boards creaked under his weight, "Son, never sell everything someone wants. Always keep the piece they'll need later." At the time, I thought it was just one of his old sayings like measure twice, cut once, or don't trust a man who won't get his hands dirty. Turns out, he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. For years, life was quiet. The neighborhood filled in, kids rode bikes, neighbors waved, and nobody bothered me much. I helped folks out when I could, fixed a breaker here, rewired a porch light there, always for free. It felt like a community back then. Then Celeste moved in. She showed up in a shiny white SUV that probably cost more than my truck and my workshop combined, and within months, she knew everyone's business. Within a year, she was on the HOA board. 6 months after that, she was running it. At first, it was little things. A comment about my old shed looking rustic. A suggestion that my vegetable garden didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. Then notes started appearing. Friendly reminders, she called them. When I installed solar panels to cut down on my electric bill, she lost her mind. Marched up my driveway with a binder under her arm, flipping pages like she was conducting an audit. All exterior modifications require architectural approval. I told her calmly I'm not in the HOA. Never signed anything. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Everyone here is subject to HOA rules. Period. After that, things escalated fast. Noise complaints when I used my table saw at noon. Parking violations for guests in my own driveway. Rumors that I was running an illegal business out of my garage. Neighbors stopped waving. Conversations died when I walked by. Celeste had a way of making people afraid without ever raising her voice. The day she called the cops was the day she thought she'd finally broken me. Standing there on my driveway, the officer's hand hovering near his cuffs, Celeste waiting for a victory, I unfolded that piece of paper from my pocket and handed it to him. It was a survey map, and everything was about to change. The officer took the paper from my hand and looked down at it like it was written in another language, which, to be fair, it kind of was if you weren't used to reading survey lines and parcel numbers. He squinted, tilted it sideways, then looked back up at me and said, "Sir, what exactly is this?" I said, "That's a certified land survey. County stamped. Updated 3 months ago." Celeste let out this sharp little laugh behind him. "That doesn't matter. HOA jurisdiction overrides private interpretation. That driveway is listed as common access." I didn't even look at her. I just pointed to a thick black line on the map and said, "That black line right there, that's my property boundary, and you're standing on it." The officer's jaw tightened. He took a step back, like the asphalt might bite him, and said he needed to make a call. That was the first crack. He walked off toward his cruiser, radio pressed to his shoulder, and suddenly Celeste wasn't smiling anymore. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice, teeth clenched so tight I could hear them click. "You think you're clever, Ethan. You think some old paperwork is going to save you." I met her eyes and said, "No, I think the truth will." The officer came back a few minutes later, face completely different now. "Sir, I'm going to need to clear this with the county before we proceed." He turned to Celeste. "Ma'am, I don't think we have probable cause here." Celeste's face went red, like someone had turned a dial too far. "This is outrageous. He's been violating HOA standards for years." The officer just shook his head. "Civil matter. You'll need to take it up with the courts." And just like that, her big moment evaporated. No cuffs, no walk of shame, just her standing there in the heat, humiliated, while I watched her realize she'd overplayed her hand. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't even close. Within a week, I had code enforcement at my door. Someone had reported an unlicensed commercial operation on my property. A few days after that, I got a notice about improper waste disposal. Then a letter about potential zoning violations. Celeste wasn't backing off. She was doubling down. That's when I decided I was done reacting. It was time to go on offense. I went back down to the county records office, same building that smelled like dust and burnt coffee, and sat across from a clerk named Marjorie, who'd clearly seen everything. She pulled up my parcel history, leaned back in her chair, and said, "You know you've got something interesting here, right?" That's when she showed me the full picture. Those little parcels my grandfather kept weren't random. They were surgical. The community playground, the retention pond, the mailbox cluster, the greenbelt walking path. Every shared space that made Ridgewood Glen marketable sat on land still deeded in my family's name. For 15 years, the HOA had been maintaining, improving, and collecting dues for property they didn't own. I felt this slow, heavy weight settle in my chest. Not excitement, not anger, just clarity. I hired a surveyor named Ron, old school guy with sun-leathered skin and a voice like gravel. He spent 2 days out there planting bright orange stakes, flagging boundaries so clear a blind man could see them. Celeste watched from her front window the entire time. A few nights later, my security cameras caught her sneaking out with a can of green spray paint, trying to cover the survey markers. Another clip showed her husband dumping yard waste just past my tree line. Trespassing, tampering, on video. When I casually mentioned to her the next morning that interfering with legal survey markers was a felony in this state, she went pale, grabbed her mail with shaking hands, and muttered something about harassment. That was the moment I knew she was scared. I filed FOIA requests for every HOA expenditure going back a decade. Pool renovations, playground equipment, landscaping contracts. Nearly $1 million spent maintaining land they had zero legal claim to. Buried deep in the original development agreement was the final nail. An easement, temporary, expiring at the end of next year, with strict maintenance standards and penalties attached. If I didn't renew it, they had 60 days to remove all improvements and restore the land at their own expense. I met with a lawyer after that. Her name was Laura Mendoza. Calm, sharp, the kind of woman who listened more than she talked. She flipped through the documents, nodded once, and said, Your grandfather was brilliant. And they've been reckless. Word started spreading. Neighbors knocked on my door, quietly at first, like they were afraid someone might see. They brought folders, emails, notices, audio recordings from HOA meetings where Celeste sounded less like a leader and more like a dictator. One woman told me she'd been fined for sidewalk chalk. Another said they made her tear down a swing set. It wasn't just about me anymore, so I decided to make it public. I announced a neighborhood barbecue, invited everyone, even the township supervisor. Celeste tried to stop it with an emergency HOA meeting, threatening special assessments and legal action. Half the board quit that night. The day of the barbecue, the sky was perfect. Smoke drifted from the grill, kids ran around laughing, and for the first time in years, people talked openly. Celeste showed up late, with a deputy and a folder full of threats. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just laid the documents out on a folding table and let the facts speak. By the time I finished, the deputy had quietly stepped away, and the supervisor was rubbing his temples. No laws broken, just power abused. 2 days later, Celeste resigned. The funny thing about power is how fast it disappears once everyone realizes it was imaginary to begin with. Celeste didn't make some dramatic announcement. No apology. No farewell email. Her name just quietly vanished from the HOA website one morning, replaced by an interim notice and a lot of unanswered questions. A week later, a moving truck showed up in front of her house, and by Sunday evening, the place was empty. Curtains gone, driveway clean, like she'd never been there at all. But the mess she left behind, that took longer to clean up. The HOA board was in shambles. 3 members had already quit. 2 more followed once they realized how deep the legal hole was, and the remaining folks looked like deer caught in headlights. They weren't bad people. Most of them had just gone along with things because it was easier than pushing back. That's how it usually happens. A woman named Karen Lee stepped up as acting president. Quiet, middle-aged elementary school teacher, the kind of person who listens before she speaks. She knocked on my door one afternoon. No clipboard, no binder, just nervous energy and honest eyes. She said, "Ethan, we need to talk." We sat at my kitchen table, sunlight coming through the window, dust floating in the air. She didn't threaten me, didn't posture. She just laid it out. The community facilities mattered. The playground, the pond, the mailbox. People depended on them. I told her I understood. I also told her I wasn't the villain here. A week later, my lawyer and her sat down together. No shouting. No games. We negotiated a clean, transparent lease. 10 years. Fair monthly rate. Clear maintenance standards. No surprise fines. No harassment clauses. If the HOA crossed the line again, the lease terminated. Period. Penalties from the past were waived. Not because they didn't deserve them, but because punishing the whole neighborhood for one person's power trip didn't sit right with me. Something shifted after that. Gardens came back. Someone reinstalled a basketball hoop. Kids chalked the sidewalks again. Neighbors waved. People lingered at the mailbox instead of rushing back inside. A few months later, we held another barbecue. This one wasn't a statement. It was just a gathering. Laughter, music, paper plates bending under burgers and potato salad. I stood off to the side for a while, watching it all, thinking about my grandfather. About that porch conversation all those years ago. Always keep the peace they'll need later. I finally understood what he meant. It wasn't just land. It was leverage. And more importantly, it was responsibility. Power isn't about control. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to open the gate. I used the lease money to start a small trade scholarship at the local high school. Nothing fancy, just enough to help a few kids who liked working with their hands but didn't see themselves in a college lecture hall. That felt right. As for Celeste, I heard she moved into another planned community a few towns over. Joined their HOA. Of course she did. Some people don't learn. They just relocate. Every now and then, I'll be out on my porch in the evening, solar panels humming quietly above me, and I'll think about how close I came to just giving in, to tearing the panels down, to keeping my head low. And I'm glad I didn't. Because here's the thing no one tells you about bullies with clipboards and fake authority. They're only powerful as long as you believe them. The moment you ask questions, the moment you look at the paperwork, The moment you stop apologizing for existing on your own land, everything changes. So I'll leave you with this. Where do you draw the line between protecting a community and controlling it? When does order turn into oppression? And if you were standing on your own driveway with a cop in front of you and a bully behind him, would you fold, or would you reach into your pocket and pull out the truth? Let me know in the comments. I read every story.